Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. This Saturday is UFC 284 in Perth, Australia. And in the co-main event, we have Yair Rodriguez versus Josh Emmett for an interim featherweight title. And this is going to be my full breakdown and prediction for this fight. I've already done a bunch of UFC 284 content, including a prediction for the main event, Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski. I will link my entire UFC 284 playlist down in the description if you want to go check it out after this. And also on Saturday night for UFC 284, I will be doing a live fight watch along for UFC 284. So if you want to join me for that, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. So Yair Rodriguez versus Josh Emmett for an interim featherweight title. I'm kind of torn on this. Alexander Volkanovski is moving up a weight class. He's fighting Islam Makhachev on the same card. So I think the UFC said, you know what, Volkanovski's fighting outside of his weight class. Who knows when he's going to fight again, or even if he fights at featherweight, because if he wins the lightweight title, he may never come back down to featherweight and fight again. So I think the UFC kind of made this interim title because if Volkanovski is to win and is to stay at lightweight, then they will promote the winner of Yair Rodriguez versus Josh Emmett to an undisputed featherweight champion. But I kind of hate it because I don't feel like either one of these guys has clear-cutly earned a title shot. You know, we're going to talk about their resumes here in a minute, but it's kind of one of those weird situations where there was no clear-cut #1 contender for featherweight. So I kind of wanted to see the UFC book like a Yair Rodriguez versus a Josh Emmett, or maybe a Yair Rodriguez versus Arnold Allen, or Josh Emmett versus Arnold Allen for a #1 contender spot while Volkanovski moved up. But essentially the interim title, that's what it is. It's a #1 contender belt. They used to actually mean something back in the day, but now the UFC just throws them out there so loosely, and I've begun to hate them. But it doesn't really matter in this instance. The winner of this fight will most likely fight Alexander Volkanovski to unify the featherweight belts, and I think that's an exciting matchup no matter who wins. And this is a very fan-friendly matchup. You have Yair Rodriguez, who is one of the most dynamic strikers I've seen, one of the best kickers I've ever seen. He's never in a boring fight. Then you have Josh Emmett. He's like a Family Dollar version of Michael Chandler. He likes to come out, squat down, load up on a big right hand, and look for the knockout. And Josh Emmett's never really in a boring fight either. So I think stylistically, this is a super fan-friendly matchup. It's very meaningful because you have the interim title on the line, which is really a #1 contender shot. So this is a fight with Alexander Volkanovski on the line in this fight. And then on top of that, it's very important for Josh Emmett. Josh Emmett is 37 years old. He'll be 38 in March. If he loses to Yair Rodriguez here, I don't believe he will get another shot at the title in the future. You have killers making their way up in the weight class. Ilia Topuria, Arnold Allen, Movsar Evloev. I don't think if Josh Emmett loses to Yair Rodriguez, I don't think he's going to be able to rebuild and make his way back to a title shot. I think it's now or never for him. For Yair, he's still young, so he can fight for the title in the future. He's only 30 years old. But for Josh Emmett, this is a must win, and I'm really looking forward to this matchup. Regardless of my complaints about the interim belt, this is a phenomenal fan-friendly matchup. So if you look at the tail of the tape for this fight, you have Yair Rodriguez, who's 14-3. Josh Emmett is 18-2. Yair is ranked #2. Emmett is ranked #5 in the UFC official rankings. You have Yair is 30 years old. Emmett is 37. Yair is 5'11". Emmett is 5'6". Yair has a 71-inch reach, and Emmett has a 70-inch reach. So a 5-inch height advantage for Yair Rodriguez and a 1-inch reach advantage for Yair Rodriguez. So if you look at Josh Emmett, he has 18 pro MMA wins, 6 by knockout, 2 by submission, and 10 by decision. So he's primarily won his fights via decision or knockout. Of his 2 losses, he's been knocked out once and lost 1 decision. But I believe that number should be higher, because his last 2 fights, you can make the argument that he lost. His last fight was against Calvin Kattar in June of 2022, and I thought Calvin Kattar clearly won this fight. I don't want to say it was an outright robbery, but it was pretty close. I think what happened in this fight, Josh Emmett stole this fight in the last 30 seconds of each round. He was being super aggressive. He was swarming Calvin Kattar. But a lot of those punches were landing on the forearms of Calvin Kattar. I thought Calvin Kattar landed more shots in this fight. I thought he landed the better shots in this fight. I think I had it 3-2 for Calvin Kattar when I scored it. Ultimately, Josh Emmett gets the decision, and he had some moments in this fight, But I just think Calvin Kattar was pumping the jab. He landed a spinning back elbow in this fight. He landed some good step-in knees in this fight. And I just think that Calvin Kattar should have got the decision, and then Josh Emmett wouldn't even be in this position. The fight before this was against Dan Ige back at UFC 269. I'm actually in the minority. I thought Dan Ige won this fight. The first round was clearly Josh Emmett. He hurt Dan Ige. The second round, Dan Ige hurt Josh Emmett. Dan Ige clearly took the second round, and then the third round was very close, but I thought Dan Ige did enough, and I think Dan Ige should have won this fight 29-28. So you're in a very weird circumstance where Josh Emmett is now fighting for a belt when he could arguably be on a 2-fight losing streak. That is insane to me. That is absolutely insane to me. And the Dan Ige fight was a unanimous decision win for Josh Emmett. The Calvin Kattar one was a split decision, but ultimately he gets the win. So on paper, he's on a 5-fight win streak. How crazy is that? Instead of being on a 2-fight losing streak, he is on a 5-fight win streak. The fight before that was against Shane Burgos back in June of 2020. Now, this fight, I thought it clearly Josh Emmett won, but this was a very competitive fight with Shane Burgos, and this was a super exciting fight, back and forth. Josh Emmett dropped Shane Burgos multiple times in this fight, but what does that really mean? I know a lot of people were disappointed when Shane Burgos got cut or didn't get re-signed, whatever you want to say. He went on to PFL, but at the same time, Shane Burgos was never going to be the elite of the elite in the featherweight division. So, there's not too much to say about that win. And then the wins before that, Mirsad Bektik, TKO, Michael Johnson, TKO. What does that really mean? It doesn't mean a whole lot. His last loss was to Jeremy Stephens back in February 2018, where he was brutally KO'd. I mean, one of the most brutal elbows I've ever seen. It was like an H-bomb, Dan Henderson's H-bomb version of the elbow. And I know a lot of people are going to say, you lost to Jeremy Stephens. Jeremy Stephens, 5 years ago in 2018, was a lot better fighter than he is today, fighting in the PFL, losing fights in the PFL. So this wasn't a horrible loss to have. And then just to mention a couple other wins for Josh Emmett, he had a KO win over Ricardo Lamas, who I believe is retired at this point in time. But Lamas was a very good fighter at that point in time. And there's really not much more to mention. He's been in the UFC since 2016, and he's finally worked his way up to a title shot. If you move on to Yair Rodriguez, he has 14 wins, 5 by knockout, 3 by submission, 6 by decision. Of his 3 losses, he got knocked out twice and has 1 loss via decision. And the 1 loss to Frankie Edgar, which is the 1 TKO or KO loss in the UFC, he was just ground and pounded, and eventually it was stopped by a doctor. We'll talk about that fight a little bit more in a second. His last fight was in July of 2022 against Brian Ortega. And a lot of people look at this fight and say essentially, it was inconclusive. And I understand that Brian Ortega injured his shoulder, but you have to take into account what we saw before that. Yair Rodriguez was schooling Brian Ortega on the feet. He was landing nasty shots. He stuffed the takedown. And in the clinch, he was landing some nasty strikes in the clinch as well, being super aggressive in the clinch. And then Brian Ortega gets a takedown. Yair starts rolling for an armbar. Brian Ortega pulls the arm out of the armbar, dislocates his shoulder, and the fight is stopped. Now, while I would have liked a more conclusive ending, I still think this is a solid win for Yair Rodriguez. He was landing on the feet. He was busting Brian Ortega up. And ultimately, him going for the armbar is what caused the shoulder to dislocate. So I think it's a solid win for Yair Rodriguez. I mean, would I have preferred to see a more conclusive ending? Yes. But ultimately, that's what we got against Brian Ortega. The fight before that was against Max Holloway. He lost. This was back in November of 2021. Yair Rodriguez hasn't been particularly active. He fought once in 2022, once in 2021, twice in 2019, and once in 2018. So he hasn't really been super active over the last few years. The fight against Max Holloway was a fight that I thought he would clearly lose. And he actually really impressed me in this fight. And I hate to elevate a guy off a loss, but in my opinion, Yair Rodriguez's stock went up in this Max Holloway fight. I thought he lost, but he looked so good. He was chopping the legs of Max Holloway. He was landing some good shots on the feet. He was forcing Max Holloway to look for takedowns. Max Holloway is an amazing striker. To force him to look for takedowns was incredible. Now, Max Holloway was landing good shots, but it was a competitive fight. It was a clear win for Max Holloway. But you could also make the case that Yair Rodriguez won the 5th round. To do that against a guy the caliber of Max Holloway is incredible, considering Max Holloway is known for his cardio, his unbelievable conditioning. So for Yair to potentially take that 5th round, I think was incredible. And I know a lot of people are going to mention, Max Holloway took him down in this fight. And I think a lot of people are remembering Yair Rodriguez being on the bottom a lot in this fight. And even at one point in time, Max Holloway full mounted him. But I believe there was only one takedown from Max Holloway in this fight. The other instances where Yair ended up on his back was when he was throwing dynamic kicks and he slipped to the ground, and then Max Holloway would follow him to the ground. And also, you have to take into account, I don't think Yair was thinking that Max Holloway was going to wrestle at all. So I don't want to put too much stock in Max Holloway out wrestling Yair Rodriguez. The fight before that was a win over Jeremy Stephens. Jeremy Stephens was on his decline at this point in time. I don't know how much that really means. That was in October 2019. But he went out there and schooled him with his kicks for 3 rounds and beat him up. He has that crazy KO win over Chan Sung Jung where he was losing the fight. The last second of the 5th round, he throws an upward elbow and brutally KOs the Korean Zombie. And then his last loss, other than Max Holloway, was against Frankie Edgar back in 2017. Frankie Edgar was still an amazing fighter at this point in time. And Yair was still very, very young. You know, this is 6 years ago. That's crazy to me. So Yair was only 24. Frankie Edgar took him down, beat him up. Eventually, it ended up being a doctor stoppage because of all the damage that Frankie Edgar did. But I think Yair Rodriguez is a much improved fighter since then. And when I look at this matchup, I see 2 guys who are going to come out here and strike in this fight. I do think Josh Emmett has a wrestling advantage, but I don't think it's so significant that Josh Emmett's going to win this fight with his wrestling. I don't think he's going to go out there and be able to take Yair Rodriguez down and control him on the ground. And Josh Emmett, that's never his game plan. His game plan is never to go out there and just take a guy down, control him, and eke out rounds that way. But I do think Josh Emmett probably should try to implement the wrestling against Yair just because he's shown a slight weakness in the past. The Max Holloway fight, obviously I just mentioned, he got taken down once there. Controlled a little bit throughout the fight, but he always scrambled back to his feet. And also, I think Yair Rodriguez is going to be preparing for Josh Emmett to come out there and attempt to wrestle. But I think this is going to be a fan-friendly matchup. I think it's going to be primarily contested on the feet. And I think what we're going to see here is Josh Emmett moving forward, loading up on that right hand, and then Yair kind of backing up, counter-striking, picking his shots. And I just think this is one of those matchups where you really have to look at age. Josh Emmett is going on 38 years old. And then you also have to take into account that even his last 2 wins, he hasn't looked particularly impressive, you know. I thought he lost to Dan Ige. I thought he lost to Calvin Kattar. I would probably pick Yair Rodriguez over both of them. Now, I do think Josh Emmett has a power advantage. I do think Josh Emmett, has a really good chin, but Yair has a really good chin as well. So I think what this comes down to is this fight is going to be primarily contested on the feet. And I think Yair Rodriguez is such a dynamic striker, an ever-improving striker. I think Yair Rodriguez wins this fight. My official prediction is Yair Rodriguez via first-round step-in knee KO. I think Josh Emmett wades forward. He loads up on the right hand, and I think Yair Rodriguez has amazing knees. He showed some step-in knees in that Max Holloway fight as well. And Josh Emmett is just so short, and he ducks down, loading up on the power. He telegraphs it every time. And I think Yair Rodriguez is such an elite striker. I think he's going to be chopping the legs of Josh Emmett. I think he's going to be counter-striking with the hands because Yair Rodriguez has been known for many years as an elite-level kicker. His striking with his punches in particular has evolved a lot over the past few years, and I think he's going to be lighting Josh Emmett up. I think Josh Emmett is going to be at a significant speed disadvantage in this fight, and I think Emmett's going to look for some knockout shots, and I just don't think he's going to find it. I think he's going to overextend. I think Yair, one of his massive strengths is his diversity of attacks. He's using his kicks. He'll kick to the legs. He'll kick to the body. He'll be throwing wild cartwheel kicks, but he also mixes in the hands, and he throws at a good volume as well. He'll be throwing combinations with his hands, and before his hands are even back, he's already throwing a leg kick. So the guy's distracted, the opposite fighter's distracted by the punches, and he's kicking the legs. And I just think late first round, I think Yair's really going to start to get the timing on Josh Emmett. And I think Josh Emmett's going to come in loading up on a shot or looking for a takedown because he realized I can't strike with this guy. It's a massive speed disadvantage. And I think Yair Rodriguez is going to land a nasty step-in knee and brutally finish Josh Emmett. And I think it's going to be one of those highlight reel KOs. I think Josh Emmett's going to be out cold. I think Yair Rodriguez is not even going to follow up on him. That's how brutal I think this KO is going to be. He's only been KO'd one time in his career by Jeremy Stephens, which we already talked about. And Jeremy Stephens has nasty power, but I think you add all that damage he's taken, you add the fact that I think he's going to be ducking down, loading up on a shot, You add the fact that Yair has some of the best kicks and knees in the game. I think he's going to catch Josh Emmett and brutally KO him. If this fight does go past the first round, I think Josh Emmett's going to look to clinch. He's going to look for takedowns. I think he's going to realize he's not able to strike with Yair Rodriguez, but I don't think he's going to be super successful. If he gets Yair down, I think he'll scramble back to his feet, and I think eventually the KO will come for Yair Rodriguez. I think Josh Emmett is going to leave this fight. He's going to be brutalized, even if it ends in the first round. And also, even in the clinch, Yair Rodriguez is filthy in the clinch. He's one of the very few fighters. I know everyone's trying to go out there and take out their opponent. Yair goes out there and he's honestly looking to hurt guys. He was clinched up with Brian Ortega and he was throwing one of the most petty strikes I've ever seen in my life. He was heeling to the shin of Brian Ortega, and he did this over and over and over again. He is going to go out there and look to take Josh Emmett's head off. So regardless if it's a bicycle kick or a spinning back elbow, if Calvin Kattar's landing spinning back elbows on Josh Emmett, guess what? Yair Rodriguez may very well as well. So I really think even if it's not that step-in knee, I think Yair Rodriguez will find the KO first or second round, but my official prediction, again, is a first round KO by Yair Rodriguez, a step-in knee in the late first round, like the last minute and a half of the first round. I think Yair Rodriguez finishes Josh Emmett and wins the interim featherweight title. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.